Seriously, I told you I keep getting interrupted today, so I'm going to continue on my video. So we have what we call the serial comma, which is sometimes referred to as the Oxford comma or the Harvard comma. Right. So this is when we have a series of maybe three or more items in a row. So if I said, I'm afraid of heights, large bodies of water, and snakes. Side note, those are all true. I'm definitely afraid of heights, and I do not like large bodies of water, and I hate snakes. Well, this comma right here is what we refer to as the serial comma. And the reason we call it that, I'll bring back my laser pointer here, is because you've made a series or a listing, and it's that last comma right before the word and. So officially it's called the serial comma, but we also refer to it as the Harvard comma or the Oxford comma. And the question comes up every year. Isn't that last comma right before the word and optional? And in a very snarky way, I always say things like, well, as if pressing that button is that extra keystroke is such an oppressive task. Like, oh, I'm so tired of pushing these buttons. Well, thank goodness I don't have to push that one. That's optional. It's not optional. Let's talk about why. So let's take a look at some examples of a series. If I said something like, I would like to thank my parents, God, and Mr. Marsh, or if I said, in her free time, Grace Facebook stalks her two old boyfriends, Mr. Cantrell and her youth pastor. Or if I said, I'm afraid of heights, large bodies of water, and snakes. Each of those have a series of three items that I've listed there. But if we took out the Oxford or Harvard comma, you would end up saying, I would like to thank my parents, God, and Mr. Marsh. And what you've done is you've created an appositive. Basically, what it looks like, if we take out the comma after the word God, you've created an appositive, a really creepy appositive. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not creepy, but it's almost like saying, I'd like to thank my parents. You're like, well, who are your parents? God and Mr. Marsh. As if God and I created a super child and you are he. When you take out the Oxford comma, you created a weird appositive. Look at the second one, which is even creepier. In her free time, Grace Facebook stalks her two old boyfriends, Mr. Cantrell and her youth pastor. By taking out that Oxford or Harvard or serial comma, now instead of saying that she Facebook stalks her two old boyfriends, Mr. Cantrell and her youth pastor, now Mr. Cantrell and her youth pastor look like they are her old boyfriends. And so therefore, that's really creepy. Lastly, if I said I'm afraid of heights, large bodies of water, and snakes, if I cut out the Oxford comma here, that doesn't make any sense at all. Large bodies of water and snakes doesn't make any sense to be a positive of heights. Yeah, that's not funny at all. It is kind of stupid. And that's the reason why we excuse it. That's the reason why people will say it's optional. Because oftentimes it won't create a weird appositive. Oftentimes it just sounds just kind of normal. So there will be many occasions where when you omit or you remove that serial comma, it's not going to create any kind of ambiguity. It's not going to create anything odd. But sometimes it does. And that's why we were asking you to be safe and just simply put in that comma, just for that slight opportunity where it could create ambiguity, it could create an odd sentence. Why not be safe and put in the Oxford comma? Now, the only reason that you might avoid the serial comma is if you're actually working as a professional journalist. You may not realize this, but there are different style books for writers. And if you are a journalist, meaning you write for a magazine, a newspaper, an online source, something like that, you use what they call the AP or the Associated Press style book. And the AP style book makes the serial comma or the Oxford comma or the Harvard comma optional. But if you're not a journalist, you have to use the Oxford comma. And when you take the SAT requires you to put in the Oxford comma. It's not optional. And so this is a little trick just to make sure you know in the back of your mind, it's not an option. I'm not a journalist. I'm taking the SAT. I'm in grammar class. I've got to put in that comma. All right, let's continue on. Another stylistic choice as a writer is to play with a series and how you can actually play around with commas and conjunctions in a series. So if I said something which is very traditional, let's say we ate, laughed, danced, and sang at Allie's graduation bonfire party, that would be a serial comma where I wait to the very last item in a list, I put a comma, the conjunction and then that last item. But did you know you can actually put the word and in between each of your words? We ate and laughed and danced and sang at Allie's graduation bonfire party. which we call a polysydenton, or I can actually cut out the ands and put a bunch of commas in. We ate, laughed, danced, sang at Allie's graduation bonfire party. And that's called an asydenton. Let's take a look at these two exceptions. So, a polysydenton is when you have a listing of at least three or more, but instead of using any kind of comma, you put an and in between it. So basically, the items are like A and B and C and D and E. It kind of gives a lilt or a little bounce to the reader's voice when they read it. The other reason that we do it is the connotation of a list like this makes it seem like it's much more extensive or longer than it really is. So you're like, hey, did you go to Allie's bonfire party? You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't go. Was it fun? You're like, oh, you missed out. You're like, what did you do? Oh my gosh, we ate and laughed and danced and sang. It sounds like you did a lot of things. And so if I was listing maybe three items, I could say, I find many of you to be intelligent, assiduous, and conscientious. All of a sudden, my list seems much longer because I then put these ands in between each one. I love a good polysydenton. We call it poly because poly means many. So think about how there are many ands in between each item. And that's why we call it a polysydenton. The other one is the asydenton. Think of the word A or the letter A in front of a word as sort of like meaning not, like you're symmetrical and then there's asymmetrical. So when I say asydenton, it basically means there's not an and or a conjunction in between the items. So what you do here is you actually just simply put commas, but you'll notice in the last item, if I say A, comma, B, comma, C, comma, D, comma, E, I don't have that and. And the reason I do that is it gives the connotation that the list is continuous. It doesn't stop after the last item, it goes on. So if I said, did you go to Allie's graduation bonfire party? You're like, no, what did you guys do there? Like, oh my gosh, we did so much. We ate, laughed, danced, sang. And it gives the impression that there were other things that you did. The serial comma makes it seem like there's only four things. We ate, laughed, danced, and sang. But the asydenton gives the impression that the list goes on. If I said, I find many of you to be intelligent, assiduous, conscientious, I could go on with other adjectives. I just simply stop there. So the asydenton gives the impression that the list continues, whereas the polysydenton gives the impression that it's sort of the list is long, but it gives a sort of a bounce, sort of a positive bounce to that list. So a difference in connotation for both of those. Last exception for today are what we call elliptical coordinate structures. So one common ellipsis, meaning an ellipsis is that punctuation mark like a dot, dot, dot. And what it means is you've cut out or there's a missing word in the sentence. So a common ellipsis that we have is when we eliminate the second determiner in a series or a coordinate phrase. It's really kind of wordy. Let me show you what I mean, because even when I read it to myself, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So if I said, my sister and mom are watching The Bachelor, well, if you were going to diagram this, I think you would realize the word my is sort of understood to be with both sister and mom. It's my sister and my mom. And so what you've done is you don't really have to list that second determiner because it's assumed when I see that word my out here that it's also carrying over here. And so it's almost like it's kind of been cut out, like a little ellipses, like a dot, 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 but it's kind of sitting there. All right, let me build on this. If I said something like, my pregnant sister and mom are watching The Bachelor, this is where we have to be careful. It says be careful because when you include a modifier, that changes it. I can assume the word my goes with my sister and my mom. But how do I know the word pregnant only goes with sister? Is mom pregnant? And so if I'm not sure when I write it this way, I might have to find a better way of writing it because I can assume that the word my travels, but you don't want pregnant to travel. So there's other ways of writing it. I could say something like, my pregnant sister and my mom are watching The Bachelor. That makes it pretty clear. Or I could say, my mom and pregnant sister are watching The Bachelor. Here the word my travels with both, but you can see that pregnant is only with the word sister, and it doesn't travel. So sometimes we may have to clarify which one we mean when we're using something where we're being elliptical, which is a fancy way of saying you've cut out some words. The one thing I want you to pay close attention to today is what happens with numbers. Numbers are really tricky. They can pose some problems for us. If you said there were 6 stray dogs and cats left at my door this morning, Well, I assume the word stray goes with dogs and cats. But what about six? Are there six dogs and cats? Or are there six dogs and six cats? Did you wake up and have six animals at your door? Or 12? Think about it. Was there a cat, another cat, another cat? Then you got a dog and a dog and a dog. Or were there other cats and other dogs showing up? I'm loving this picture. Anyway, so when you come across a number and it's trying to be elliptical, meaning it's trying to be shared with a coordinate structure, meaning there's two, just make sure it's very clear whether it is in terms of a number. It's so hard for me to focus right now. And make sure that the number is actually clear about which one you're talking about. Was it six dogs and six cats, or three and three, or so forth? I seriously, I'm loving this. Anyway, all right, that's all for today, everybody. Oh, goodness, the madness of stuff.